Hey, what's up, MotoGP fans? Welcome back. My name is DJ. This is Full Throttle Moto 31. I'm your host, and unfortunately, we do have some cool music. We don't have the ladies with us. Kayla and Maddie. Maddie just finished the French GP. Kayla is practicing and getting ready for Barber and so forth in her next Moto America race. So you're stuck with me for tonight, but I really want to do a show and talk about what was an amazing MotoGP and give my thoughts on things and my perspective. So what you're going to hear tonight represents me only and not Maddie, not Kayla, just myself. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. I think I have some pretty good insights. I shouldn't say insights, perspectives. I don't have necessarily insights because that requires actually being close to and speaking to the riders in the paddock like Maddie does, and I don't have that, and I'm also not a racer like Kayla is. So I do have some limitations. I'm gonna turn my camera off for a second just to point the light away so that you don't have to look at that ring light in my face, and then we'll get it going here after what was an absolutely incredible and amazing GP that we just need to talk about. You know, we just need to get into it. So there, you can still see the ring light in there, but yeah, I got some work to do on that. I'm gonna have to lift my ring light up for my other show, Calling All Beings, where we're with a network and they have some very stringent policies regarding lighting and background screens and all that. So I just got a green screen and all these things. Anyway, let's get right into it, ladies and gentlemen. I have drawn up some things. So we have, first of all, let me lower the music because I think that's probably a bit high. There we go. It's probably just barely audible now. Yeah. So you should hear me well. And let's get into it. It was an amazing Le Mans Grand Prix or Grand Prix, I should say, where obviously Jorge Martin was amazing. He had the fastest lap in qualifying and set a record for that. And then he won both the sprint race and he won the main race, the Grand Prix, with Marc Marquez coming in second in both. Amazingly from 13th on the grid, but Jorge Martin just, continues to show that he is just one of the fastest, if not the fastest person in the world right now. And on a given day, it seems to be either he or Pecco Bagnaia that are the fastest people in the world. And of course, part of that is due to their machinery. Were they not on that machinery, they would not be the fastest there. And that is kind of going to get into some of the things that we're going to talk about today, but it doesn't make it any less incredible what these guys are able to do, all the racecraft and in-race gamesmanship in which they're fighting with one another, people who have co-equal or semi-equal machinery. So let's take a look at what we got here for you. So Jorge is the winner. The thrill of a satellite team, albeit with factory equipment, winning, and the temporary displacement of status quo with Jorge's win and Marc's ascension to P2 is what makes this a great storyline. I mean, because Ducati has been so dominant, I think they won 70% of the podiums last year were Ducati, I believe. I got to go over that stat. I did all the stats last year and counted every podium, and I got to find it because it's in my iNotes, but as you know, that can be way down the list. But I counted basically every podium that we had and whether or not a Ducati was in 1, 2, or 3 in those podiums. And they were in a lot of them. So it is obviously the most dominant motorcycle out there, regardless of who your favorite is. And mine is KTM because I'm a former Super Duke owner. And my best buddy, Justin, is actually, he just had his first race on his KTM. I think it was a 690. He's an enduro rider. So he was a moto track day guy. We used to go to track days together and pretend road race, but he's now an enduro rider, and he did well. He beat like 3 guys on the grid, which wasn't easy. They were in his age group and had serious arm pump. So yeah, now I know what our riders are talking about when they talk about arm pump. But in any case, it really was an incredible weekend, and Jorge really made his statement about what that he deserves to have a factory ride, and we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about the commentary from Gigi Delinea, plus what was reported on Paddock Pass podcast. There was a Spanish journalist on there, brilliant guy, very insightful, and sort of what he had reported that he heard about where Ducati is angling in terms of a rider for 2025 on that in the factory team. So going on down, let's get the rest of the Ducatis. Bastia, Enea Bastianini finished fourth. He also had the fastest lap in the race. And now I guess it's sort of a question of his qualifying and his consistency to string laps together in pursuit of the front, sort of as he did in 22 when he won 4 races, which won him the factory seat. I mean, that season, he had more wins than Jorge Martin. You can almost bet that, well, certainly last season he didn't. He did battle injury, and Jorge Martin did not. But I don't think he will have as many wins when you consider sprint and main race as Jorge Martin did. He really is just so fast and so competitive. And you can see what Jorge Martin learned in not letting Pecco get away at the beginning of the race. Pecco could put on so much pace. I mean, those of you who are Moto American fans can recall Jake Gagne doing these sorts of things and really putting on such a gap in the beginning of the race that nobody, and this goes back to even the season where Danilo Petrucci debuted in Moto America on a Ducati V4 Panigale, and in some of these races, Jake Gagne would put on such a gap that nobody could actually catch him, and then he would just kind of maintain lap after lap after lap, and he was very good at not making a mistake. And sort of Pecco Bagnaia is capable of the same thing, just at a lot higher level in terms of being a GP rider. So Jorge Martin did really well to not let him get away, to stay behind him, to be aware of his tire temperature. And he even talked about how there were certain areas of the track that he chose in order to try to keep his tire cool instead of really being up on the rear tire of Bagnaia to apply what may have been more pressure, right? But it was very intelligent of him to back off a little, to take different lines coming out of corners and allow that cool air to come over his front tire and allow him to be competitive until late into the race. I think it was 20 or 21 laps in, perhaps, where it may have even been more than that, where he actually took Bagnaia. So that really was a phenomenal effort, and we got to take our caps off to Jorge Martin. Pecco Bagnaia continues to be amazing after, sometimes he'll have a sketchy Friday. He ended up having a good Friday. This time around, was at the front of the grid, obviously, and yesterday just had a mechanical problem that they don't want to discuss what went wrong with the bike, but something went wrong with the motorcycle, and therefore Pecco could not exercise all of his dominance yesterday in that race. And ended up retiring very early in the race. I can't remember if it was the first or second lap. Well, today he definitely made up for that. Other things I want to discuss, we're kind of going to get into when Mark made his approach on Digia. So we're going to go through a little bit more of Digia. So Bastianini was amazing. Like I said, he ended up finishing fourth, I believe. I believe he was fourth. Absolutely amazing the way that he was able to do the long lap penalty and come back and pass a whole bunch of people and get up front again, showing that how late race with worn tires, he's still quite fast, but he's obviously lacking something that is preventing him from being like Pecco, consistently at the front of the grid, driving the grid more or less. The way that Pecco seems to drive the grid in a lot of ways. What he does, if you kind of think about the grid, what Pecco does, kind of other people react to. And in terms of Mark and in terms of Jorge, his consistency, his resiliency. Last year, his legs getting run over by Brad Binder and then coming back and racing. I don't know if that was Buriram at India was that next race, but it's just unconscionable that you would be sitting in the track, get high-sided with nobody around him basically after in the first lap, get high-sided into next week, be sitting on your backside on the track, have Brad Binder run over his legs, and then he was racing like the next race. I don't know how you do that, but these folks are something else, honestly. Bezzecchi, let's go to Marco Bezzecchi, the second rider from the VR46 team, or actually, I guess you would have called him the first rider. It may be that the first rider and the second rider may be looking to switch here with Digia's performance, but Bezzecchi crashed out on lap 3 from 8th position after being overtaken on a beautiful overtake by Bastianini. And I don't know if he was trying to fight back, but he lost the front, and it was in as many days he crashed the same way. It may have even been the exact same corner, unfortunately. So kind of a bummer for Bezzecchi, but this is going to speak to sort of how Mark's ascension on this motorcycle, this 23 motorcycle, over and above everybody else, and how extraordinary that is compared to the other riders that are riding year-old machinery. And Bezzecchi obviously has struggled. I just got to get a sip here. I forgot to bring water. I should not be having an energy drink right now, but just got to wet my whistle. But Bezzecchi, we kind of could get into what happened with him not taking that Pramac seat. I think was a huge error. And let me paint sort of an example of what that might look like. If you look at Marc Marquez and what happened, you're taking a professional that gave up this $25 million a year or whatever, or $15 million a year, whatever it was that he was making. I've heard different estimates from different outlets, so somebody can correct me on that. If you know it, please feel free and throw it up in the comments and correct me on that. But Mark left, double-digit $15 million a year. He was far and away the highest paid rider, with maybe Fabio being number 2 and Pecco with bonuses being somewhere close to what Fabio was with win bonuses and Ducati's different structuring that they have in terms of pay. And he left that because he wanted to be on the most competitive motorcycle available that he could get, and made that deal with Gresini Ducati. And now you could see the difference between Mark on a subpar Honda, and that's, I think, the nicest way I could describe it. And I realize that this team and the factory is working very hard on producing a motorcycle that is capable of competing, and that's going to take time. And everybody has to be patient with that, but there's no question that it was a subpar motorcycle. That said, Mark made the jump and forfeited, we don't know how much money, but a lot of money. I mean, if he was making 15 million, he could be making 14 million less than that. We don't know what Gresini Ducati is paying him. We don't know what their budget is. But he did that because he said, I'm going to get on the best motorcycle and I'm going to go and compete. And to me, this is just me, to leave behind the offer of the factory support on the latest machine, the 2024 Pramac Ducati, with support from the factory, I just don't think that was a very mature decision to make for what he's doing. I realize he has friends there, he has mates, he has buddy, has a great atmosphere, blah, 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 blah. Obviously, Jorge Martin is thriving in that environment, whatever Promac's environment is. And maybe you won't have your boys there, but, it's like Marc Marquez thought, okay, I got all my boys and people that I love over in Honda, and I'm going to make them my team and create a team around me and a family around me in Gresini. And you just watch how they react when he comes in the garage, from Nadia Panavani all the way down to Frankie Carcetti and all the crew. So I think that's something that he really, really should have considered more strongly than staying where it's comfortable, because who knows what he might be achieving on that bike. We can get to sort of the bike and, maybe we could do sector times and so forth. But I spoke with one of my mates tonight and we talked about what that race looked like when Mark was trying to run down Pecco. And to get into what those numbers looked like, Digia, we were going to say, looked phenomenal in sixth, finishing just behind Maverick. So Digia was awesome. Franco Morbidelli started ninth. He finished seventh. Two riders crashed out in front of Frankie. So that's basically status quo on basically what's the best bike on the grid. Will he have some better results further on in the year? I'm sure he will, but it's not very awe-inspiring, I'm sure, if you're Ducati or if you're Pramac in terms of that seat for him next year. That's just my thoughts. I don't know what they're thinking, but that's my thought when you look at the other people that are on 24 machinery are kind of running up front for the most part. Let's get to Mark now. So Mark took Digia on lap 18, which was a great overtake. He at that point, as they say, he was 2.19, or let's round it up to 2.2 seconds behind Bagnaia, and then continued to close the gap after Jorge had overtaken Pecco on lap 21. So even when Mark was able to close the gap and they would round the corner to the straightaway, you could clearly see the 24 machine was able to pull away from the 23 machine in a way that neither Pecco nor Jorge were able to pull away from one another in that area. So obviously there is some sort of differential in being able to put that power to the ground, or just the actual top speed of that 24 Ducati compared to the 23 Ducatis. I mean, that is something. Now, granted, I don't have data to support this, but when you saw those overhead shots from the helicopter or the drone, whatever was taking those shots, you could clearly see that Pecco was able to pull away from Mark when he was in that number 3 position on that straightaway, and then Mark would have to try to make it up on the brakes, and then the next thing you know, you'd see them going through the S's, and Mark was basically right behind him. So that looked clear from being on TV. I did not see the 24 Ducatis being able to do that. So obviously, that was not just fluff when Ducati said that 24 motorcycle has more power and had some additional advancements on the 23 bike. I think that's clear. If I were Mark, and being the type of competitor he is, he's not going to illustrate those for you. He has not and will not make an excuse when he does lose to those guys that they have the better bike. Even though I've heard journalists ask him that on at least 3 occasions now during press conferences, he's been asked about the difference between his bike and Pecco's bike, and he's not going to rack and stack and analyze that, because that would be like saying, well, he won because he has the better bike, and he's not going to say that. I think he feels like he's close enough with the motorcycle that he has. Let's see. So we're going to Aprilia now. Aprilia and after this, we're going to get to Ducati's 2025 decision in terms of the factory riders. We'll talk about that and what I've heard on. We'll talk about what Paddock Passes had to say. We'll talk about what Matt Oxley and Peter Baum had to say on the Oxley Baum podcast, and then I'll tell you what I picked, and then what I think is going to happen now, and why, based on what these gentlemen have said. Aleix for Aprilia started on row 2 after the first lap. He was in 4th. He got into it with Bastianini, obviously. That was kind of ugly. Then that ended up getting Bastianini a long lap penalty. But even Aleix, when he got back up there, he just slowly fell back and finished ninth. I don't know if it was something that Aleix was feeling, if it was something with the motorcycle, if it was his tires, because Mav finished fifth behind Bastianini and had a great race. I'd say if we were going to be a little critical of Mav, and again, we don't know what was going on with his motorcycle. Mark took him, Bastia took him, and it's just being, more competitive in those situations. Unless, of course, like I said, your bike's not cooperating with you, and we don't know that. Those are things that we just don't know. We don't know how his bike was reacting. Is it characteristic or is it setup? We don't know. Yamaha. So Fabio, who started in 8th, when he crashed out, he was 3 ahead. Okay, this is going to show you, because we're going to kind of get into riders versus bikes and what the differences are. And I've actually made a PowerPoint slide for you, show you some things about that. But when Fabio, who started in 8th, when he crashed out, he was ahead of 3 Ducatis, including a 2024 Ducati. He was ahead of 3 of 4 Aprilias on the grid and all remaining KTMs on the grid. While Rins finished 15th out of 16 remaining riders. So when you talk about riders, I think the analysis is very, very clear on this. It doesn't matter how great a modern rider you are today. If you don't have the equipment under you, you're not going to win. It does not matter. Now, you might say, well, DJ, what? How do you know that? I mean, how can you prove that? I mean, as far as we know, we could say Pecco's the best because he won. Well, you could say that. But here's the reason why. Mark, who was on one of the worst bikes, was like a mid-pack rider last year on a bike that people were finishing last. If they finished at all, they would just be on the back of the grid. Fabio here fights in the middle of the pack or towards the front of the pack. And again, his co-rider, who Rins, when people say he's an amazing rider, he's like Fabio's peer, he's not. He's just not. Fabio is an amazing rider. And if I submit to you, if he were sitting on a 2023 or 2024 Ducati this year, he would probably be fighting at the front with Mark and Jorge and Pecco and Maverick and et cetera, and Digia, et cetera, and Bastianini. If you don't have the bike, it does not matter how great a rider you are, because the engineers are able to engineer a bike that will outpace you as a rider in your talent. Mark has shown that because now that he's on a bike that's competitive, he's battling at the front again, and he'll probably have some wins this year, even on a 23 machine that's not as good as the 24 machine, and probably won't receive the updates that the 24 machine will receive. He's shown that already. It's very frustrating, and what angers Pecco is being beaten by somebody on a bike that's, either equal to his or obviously less than his, and being beaten by that guy. And it pisses him off because he's a great rider. He's a very competitive guy. But when you talk about best is relative to what kind of machine you're on, because it doesn't matter how great a rider you're on. If you took Brad Binder and you put him on a Honda, and I'm not trying to pick on Honda. One of my favorite bikes ever was my Honda CBR F3. I love that bike to the end. And Honda is a great manufacturer. They're just got behind in technology, is what happened. But you could take Mark and put him on that bike. You could take, what would happen if you took Jorge and Pecco and put them on Hondas right now? Where do you think they'd be at in the grid? You think they'd be running up front? Because I think we all know that they would not. They would not. You have to have the bike and the rider to run up front. It's not mutually exclusive, but you have to have some of one and some of the other, because you can see. So last year, we might have said, like I was saying, Di Antonio was awesome last year. His job was on the line. He heard the call that he's not going to be on one of those bikes next year. And they were talking about Marc Marquez, and boy, his performances were awesome. And he even beat Pecco in a race, Now, did that race mean everything to Pecco? No, because he was locking up a championship. It wasn't as important to him to defend that position with his life because he was locking up a championship at that point. But now you see the difference when you have Marc on that bike and when you have Digia on that bike. Digia, first of all every one of these riders are extraordinary. And I separate that word that way because extraordinary, they are extraordinary. They are the greatest of the riders on planet Earth. All of these guys, from Taka all the way up to Pecco at number one. These guys are just the greatest. But the machinery, there's levels to these guys as well. And I submit to you that Marc is on a level that is at the front of these guys, just like Fabio, I believe, is on a level that he is in that front group of 3 or 4. You can't remove the guys that are there, that are at the front right now, and say, oh, they wouldn't be, because that would be unfair. That bears proof. You would have to prove that. And that's not going to be proven unless those guys somehow luck their way onto a non-competitive motorcycle. But you've seen what Luca Marini looked like last year, and you've seen what Luca Marini looks like this year on lesser machinery. You saw what Johan Zarco looked like last year, and you could see what he looks like this year. You saw what Marc looked like last year, and you can see what he looks like this year. So it has everything to do with the machinery to even be up front. So I won't take out the guys that are up front, but I certainly believe that probably the most talented riders out there are probably Fabio and Marc. And if I couldn't prove that, I'd say they would be running in that top 3 or 4 group with Pedro and those others that I mentioned, if they were all in equal machinery. I often thought of this last weekend. I was like, man, wouldn't that be cool if they did, and after the season they did a MotoGP Riders Cup, and they had it at whatever the last location was, and they brought out the Moto2 bikes, and every MotoGP rider got on this sort of co-equal Moto2 bike and just had a practice day and a race day. And how awesome would that be to see the MotoGP riders back on Moto2 bikes with spec bikes, with no electronics, no advanced anything, no traction control, and then you could see who the best rider is, right? Because that's what Moto2 does, In fact, let me bring up this PowerPoint slide here. Let me get rid of this, and then we have some differing agendas here, and let me see if I can share screen with this guy. Share screen. I'll select a tab or window, and we'll make it this. There we go. Okay. So you can see this little pendulum we have here. This balance where the most competitive racing is what, and this is kind of what you could think of. This is what MotoGP wants, the most competitive racing. That's what they want. The most overtakes, different people winning every week. This is what they would love to see. And the 2027 rules kind of feed into that, and we'll get into that. The manufacturers, so their desire is who can build the best bike. That irrespective of who you put on the competition's bike, our riders will win, even if we don't have the best rider. And that's the situation that they find themselves in now, that their bikes are, I think it was last week, they were like 5 of the top 6 were all Ducatis, so they have the best bike, whether we like it or not. That's just the way it is. How they got there, how much money they spent is immaterial in whether or not they have the best bike, but they want to build a bike that is so great that even if you have a better rider, your rider can't beat their bike. That's what they want. What the riders want to find out is all the way over here to the right. Who is the fastest rider, right? Who's the best rider? And you could put as a subheader here, that would be like Moto2. That's how you establish, now granted, you have better teams and better setups. You have a couple different frames, and the Boscascura frame is running really well right now in Moto2, whereas for several years it was the Calyx frame that was dominating that series. Now it's, even though they have less riders, they're doing very well. Some of the Boscascura riders, and it probably doesn't hurt that the best rider from Unaldaguer is on a Boscascura chassis. But in any case, so the riders want to know who's the fastest rider. They don't necessarily care. They don't want to find out who the best manufacturer is. They want to find out if they're better than their peers. The fans they're kind of in between these two. They want the most competitive racing, but they also want to find out who's the fastest rider, and they really want it to be the rider that they identify with the most for whatever reason. That could be nationality. It could be what motorcycle brand they ride. It could be just their personality. It could be anything. But these are the competing agendas between riders, manufacturers, safety. What we're going to get into, the most important thing here of all with the 2027 rule set is safety, because we don't want to see these guys, and hopefully in the future gals, get hurt. We want them to be on the safest machines that they could be on. Whatever that entails that they have to use to do that, we want to see the safest machines, and the circuits are not getting bigger to support that. So there you have it. So you can see that there are different agendas here. Just finding out the fastest rider, well, then every bike has to be the same. So we're not going to get that, right? Because the manufacturer's idea is, I don't want to have the same bike. I want to show that I can make my bike better. If I'm KTM, I want to show I can make a better, faster, more rider-friendly machine than Ducati is. And, they're getting closer. Aprilia, you listen to Peter Baum, they have this amazing motorcycle that can do more things. It's sort of like the utility tool of MotoGP. But he feels like they're having some problems in the garage that is causing them to be in the situation. So you see there's different agendas here. What MotoGP wants, right here. The most competitive racing. For them, they would want to see a different manufacturer standing on the one symbol on that podium every week. That would suit them. If it was Honda one week and Aprilia the next week and KTM the next week and Ducati the next week, and then maybe in the future BMW, that would be the best for them. Yamaha, Honda, they would like to see all them on that number one, number two, or number three step. And they're not getting that right now. And that's how we get to the rule set. And of course, so safety, fan appeal are all the reasons why competitiveness, safety, and fan appeal are why that new rule set has come into play. And we'll talk about that for a couple minutes. And man, let me tell you something. I have never talked this much on podcasts. I'm used to having co-hosts on all my podcasts, so this is very out of character for me to be wrapping my gums this much. So anyway, so there we are. That I just wanted to kind of go over that. Let's talk about Let's talk about the 2027 rule set, and then we'll finish with the most sexy topic, who's going to be riding for Factory Ducati next year on that red motorcycle. Obviously, as you all know, you are all well aware, we won't get deep into the weeds on this because all of you who are listening to this have looked at and by the way, if anybody has comments, let me make sure I have the chat pulled up in case there's anything. Okay. Yeah, if anybody has any comments that they want to make, say hi, tell me my opinions are stupid, whatever you want to do, please post it in the comments. fullthrottlemoto@gmail.com, and we are on Facebook and on Twitter /X at throttle31, I think is what we are. Okay, so we know about the 850cc motor, down 150 cc's from 1,000. We know that they're down to 75 millimeter bore, and we know that the stroke, I think the stroke is going to stay the same as it was. And we know that there is going to be no ride height devices, and there's going to be no hole shot devices anymore, which is going to accentuate the rider's control and their ability to make a great start, sort of like they do in World Superbike. And there will still be aero. And so for people that thought that there wasn't going to be aero anymore, I never for a second thought there wasn't going to be aero. There's definitely going to be aero for a lot of reasons. First of all, it makes it safer. It does stick the bikes to the track. There's still going to be electronics. You're still going to have advanced traction control and all those sorts of power settings where they're able to dial in the power for each turn, what they want to give. And what Simon, not Simon Patterson, whom we love, but the other Simon, who we also love, Simon Crafar, the former rider, said, what you're going to get from this, he says, is that they will put less power. They will have to take away less power than they do now, because he says on a lot of circuits and a lot of turns, they can't give the rider the full power of the motorcycle. Otherwise, it's just uncontrollable. So they have to dial back some of the power at various circuits. With the 850 cc's, he pointed out very adroitly that perhaps now they won't have to dial back as much power, and the rider will actually have more control by this way. So that's another stroke of genius maybe on the, let's call it the MotoGP legislators, whomever that made this rule set. The aero you need because you want the bikes to be more on rails than not on rails, because you want more safety for the riders going into these high-speed turns. I heard a rider who used to race in MotoGP, an amazing legendary rider, say that, they should, make them 1200 cc motors and let them slide the bikes around the corner and this kind of, well, they're already sliding the bikes around the corner with the traction control. But you take away these controls and you make it less safe for the riders. That's not something we're in favor of as fast as the bikes go now. As they were saying, I read on the race.com, Val Hironchi and Simon wrote that the Moto3 bikes now are running the pace that the 500cc MotoGP guys were running. So think about that. The Moto3 guys. And the tracks aren't getting any bigger. So we have to make it safe for the riders. Safety is number one in a sport where you can be killed, and people have been killed. We know about Marco Simoncelli, and then obviously Jason, is it Dupasquier? We lost him, or Justin, a couple of years ago from Moto3, which is absolutely tragic. A teenager, for his family to know that their son went racing and that was the end of his life. Like Marco. It's just, it's awful. So anyway, so this is what's very important about these rules. The aero is meant to allow them to go faster, safer, and that's why the aero remains. You are always going to have venerable people in the sport are always going to say, I wish it was like it was. So if we look at the NFL, the NFL now has rules where you can't smash the quarterback. They used to be able to unload on the quarterback and drive him into the turf. And they found out you had a defenseless player out there who could be in a throwing motion, not protecting himself like a running back or a fullback or a linebacker, and just get absolutely unloaded on. Same with wide receivers. Wide receivers is more protection on what you can do and not, because these folks are extended and they have no way to protect themselves and they can be severely injured. Everybody remembers Darryl Stingley, got paralyzed, from a hit to the back because he was outstretched and wasn't able to defend himself. So so it's very important, that people understand that. We could say in boxing, they'd say, oh, well, boxing's not as good anymore because we used to have 15 rounds and now they can only have 12 rounds. So it was better before. MMA, you would say, oh, this is better, when it was the George St. Pierre era. And the Gracie family said, oh, no, it's not as good because, when I fought, there was no time limit and there was no rules. George St. Pierre, sure, he's good, but under this rule set, if he fought under my rule set, how good would he be? So people are always going to look at a sport and say it was better when. But sports move forward. They don't move backward. NASCAR, the National Association of Stock Car Racing, stock car. They were stock cars. Now they are nothing like stock cars. They are race cars. But there was a time in generation 3, probably, because second generation of NASCAR is when they really built out the engines. They didn't really do suspension work, but they were able, those Super Bs, they built out those engines. But people would have said in generation 3, oh my God, this doesn't even look like a car anymore. It's just a body. This isn't a Monte Carlo. This isn't a Dodge Charger. These are race cars. These are full-on race. Exactly. But things move forward. We don't move backward and say, we're going to remove aero. We're going to remove electronics. No, you don't do that. You don't move backward. You move forward. And that's what MotoGP is doing. Sustainable fuel. Great idea. Noise abatement, I kind of don't agree with, but you know what? I'm not from Europe. So I think you don't really need noise abatement for a race weekend, but absolutely when track day guys like me go, 104 decibels and that's it. So I understand noise abatement, but I don't know that I agree with it in terms of racing necessarily at that level. NASCAR, they don't have noise abatement. I don't know if they have it in Formula One. I don't think you need it in MotoGP. As loud as the bikes are, they should just, if it, safety, 100%. We have to make it safe for these riders. As safe as we can in a sport that is inherently unsafe is what we need to do. So I think the new rule set is great. They say that it'll be safer without the whole shot device, that everybody won't arrive at turn 1 all bunched up, and that the rider's ability to anti-wheelie and to get to that first turn will be accentuated. Great. You got guys like Marc Marquez are going to say, you know what? Less control is the better, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm the most fastest natural rider. So the less rider aids, then my talent's going to come to the fore. So people like him would be absolutely, remove everything and I'll beat everybody. But again, that now, you could get to a situation where you're like Moto 2, and that's not what we're trying to do. You also have to be faster than World Superbike. Simon addressed that in the press conference when he asked him about that. He says we will be 1 second to 2 seconds slower on most of the grids. It's just they won't get as quickly to top speed as they do with launch devices, and they won't have the ride height devices, which obviously they feel, they feel that somehow that makes it unsafe. I have to take their word for it. There's something about that they think is not good, and so I trust that they know what they're doing, because in the end, we can all have opinions about what we think MotoGP should do. But the reality is, unless you work in the garage and you are a technician, a team principal, a crew chief, a rider, an engineer, a data analyst, unless you're one of these people, you really don't know what you're talking about. They know what's best for their sport and what's safest, and obviously the legislating body. But we, if you're not one of those people that is inside the garage, you really don't know. You just know what somebody else told you. And that's, and then, everybody's entitled to an opinion, but they're the ones that know what's best for the sport and what's safest for the sport. So I have to go along with what they said. And I think what they've done, we're going to have more, even though it doesn't sound as good, we're going to have an 850cc bike, but the way it sounds like the way they've designed it, it's going to have the characteristics. It won't rev as high as the 800 bikes did several years back, where it was a little bit of a mess. So I'm expecting it is going to be more competitive, more rider influence, which the riders, they're all going to say, Yeah, because they all want to prove which of them is the best. Remember that chart? They all want to see. It was on this side actually. They want to see which rider is the best, and that a little bit less of the controls like hole shot and ride height is going to allow them to see that. They're still going to have aero to help keep them on the track in the corners, and it's going to help them out in those areas, and hopefully just make it safer for those guys and gals or future gals, because who knows, we may be inside of 5 years before we see our first female in the series. It could be less than that. We don't know. All we need to do is get somebody into Moto 2 or World Superbike or something where they really can compete with the riders that are there, and we could have our first female in MotoGP in 5 to 10 years. Who knows? I hope so. It would be cool. Because I think that if you go to the gym these days and you see the athletes that are in the gym that are female, and you see how strong they are and how fit they are, I don't see the difference of why a female can't control these motorcycles at this speed the way that men do. I don't see that. I cannot find a reason why that can't happen. I think it's a development, it's just now it's developing. We're going to see, Maddie is a team owner for Sekhmet Racing International. She's got Mallory Dobbs and Lizzie, trying to remember her name, Lizzie from the UK, as riders. And I got to meet Mallory and Maddie over at Austin. And, one of those riders could end up being in MotoGP. I mean, that could be the result of that series. I do believe that women, I mean, let me make an analogy for you guys, okay? Ranger training. I mean, last time I checked, I think we had 13 women make it through Ranger training, Army Rangers. And those of you who've been in the military, I'm retired military, Air Force Special Ops Command, and Rangers are very, very, very tough, durable people that have been through that training. So if a female can make it through Ranger training, then a female can make it through MotoGP. It's a question of the right person with the right commitment to fitness and strength, and the right natural talent, motorcycle racing talent. That could be Kayla, for all we know, our co-host. She could be that rider. Mallory could be that rider. One of these folks in the women's championship that's coming up under the World Superbike. It's starting here very shortly. The next Superbike race, I believe, will feature the first Women's Cup, their Women's World Championship, actually, under World Superbike. I believe they have a 750cc bike, I believe, or a super sport. I can't remember. I'm going to have to check into that, and Maddie can get us educated on that. But yeah, we could see females in the championship in the not too distant future. Just because of those reasons. They have now, women are training, they have the physical strength to control these motorcycles. It's just a question of all those other things falling into line. I believe they can do that. Let's talk about, let's finish up here with the Ducati. We got about 7 minutes left. Let's finish up with the Ducati 2025 lineup for Factory Ducati. So, I actually did a spreadsheet, which I sent I got to fill it out by mid-season. I sent it to Maddie and Kayla with where every rider is going to be for silly season. And I had Jorge. I have already written him into the Factory Ducati seat. But what I will tell you is, again, what people like me or people who are outside of the garages in MotoGP, what we know are two different things. It's like what average journalist knows, and then what Peter Baum, who's a journalist, or Matt Oxley knows, people that have actually raced, or someone who's been in the paddock in different capacities for 25 years in a garage. So there are different levels to this stuff, right? So I thought Jorge Martin was a shoo-in. He's the fastest rider. He's earned it. You know, with what he did last year, he was just points away from winning the championship from Pecco. Went down to the last race. I thought he should be sitting next to Pecco on that bike. This shows you what I know. When you listen to this journalist who was on with Adam Wheeler and David Emmett on the Paddock Pass podcast, I believe those are the two. Steve English may have even been in on that episode. I'm not sure. And the Spanish journalist, it was on their note show, Paddock Pass note show, which you can listen to the first part. To listen to the entire thing, you need to join their Patreon at Paddock Pass on Patreon. For about the price of a coffee, they say. So I think I'm going to join it. What he said was that people don't understand certain things about the way Gigi Dall'Igna thinks, this journalist. And forgive me because I don't know his name. And let me see if I can look it up, because I want proper attribution at all times when I, that is, it's like, those of you who've been to college, it's like citing your sources. I know this looks funny. I need to get prescription sunglasses. That's the key to this whole thing. Proper attribution. This gentleman, Manuel Pesino GP. Yeah, so his name is Manuel Pesino. Because I'm trying to see, because he's Spanish, so Pacino would be Italian, and Pesino, when I said that's because my wife's from Brazil. That's how the Brazilians might say it. So Manuel Pesino is his name, and he is a top media figure, journalist and broadcaster for MotoGP. So Manuel Pesino. Manuel says that he has spoken with Gigi Dall'Igna, and he says Gigi Dall'Igna is not what's known as a Ducatista, which means he doesn't live, breathe, eat Ducati. He's there because they paid him to create an amazing bike, and he's done that, and he's proven over the last 3 years that his bike is far and away the best and most competitive motorcycle, irrespective of what rider has gotten on it. And he would want to prove going forward so he has another year of unabated, unbridled engineering. Gloves are off, ride height devices, whole shot devices, aero. He has a whole nother year of that. And then maybe there'll be a technology freeze in 26. And he will want to see, with the best rider, a rider that knows how to develop a bike, how far can that creation go? And by the way, he says, Manuel, wouldn't you want that rider to be developing your 2027 effort? Someone who is extremely capable, analytical, mature, all these sorts of things. And when he made reference to Jorge Martin, and this is not my comment because I don't know Jorge Martin, I'm not in the grid, I've never spoken to him, I can make no assertions that anyone who only watches on TV could make. He said that he is seen as selfish. I don't know that that's true. I can't. Yes. So I'm just repeating to you what he said on Paddock Pass Note Show. And you have also heard, now to bolster, actually, a different point about him would be when Simon Crafar, I believe it was, said he asked Jorge Martin about his settings. And he asked him about different technical settings on the bike. And Jorge Martin was like, I don't know. We know that they have said, the commentators have said when they talk to his garage and they say what he does, he keeps the same settings every week and he knows what the bike's going to do. And then he may adjust a little, but he doesn't change the setting of the bike the way Pecco has every bike infinitely and with precision sets the bike up for each track. And Jorge does not do that. So if you're Ducati, you're thinking, who do we want to help us usher in this new era of motorcycle, you could see why Manuel says that he believes they're going to choose Marc Marquez. I'm not saying that he is saying that Gigi Dall'Igna told him that, but he is, I guess, reading between the lines, and he believes it's going to be Marc Marquez that is going to be on that bike in 2025. For my money, I had Jorge Martin on there, but it just goes to show you, I don't really know all these things of what's going on behind the scenes, and these guys do. And they know they're talking to these figures. Our journalists that are in MotoGP, they're in the paddock every week, are talking to people in this garages. You're smoking a cigarette outside somewhere, or you happen over to hospitality. These guys get together. They all know what the personalities of these riders are like. In every garage, I bet you could go into a garage and they could tell you about half a dozen different or a dozen different riders and what their personalities are like. So maybe on that basis, they've decided that they're going to choose Marc. So I don't know. I don't think Bastianini is going to be in it. As great a rider as he is, he could end up back on Gresini. A lot of things could take place because we don't know if Pramac is going to be with Yamaha next year or if they're going to be back with Ducati with two factory bikes. Because if Pramac does go with Yamaha, that changes the entire landscape of what's going to happen at the top, because then that means that either is there another team that Ducati's going to get to have the 6 bikes on the grid, or excuse me, 2, 4. Do they have 8 bikes on the grid? I guess they have 8 bikes on the grid. Sorry, because they have two factory, 2 Pramac, 2 VR46, and obviously they have 2 Gresini. So who's going to get the factory bikes next year if for some reason Pramac defects and goes to Yamaha and forms their satellite squad? Because if those factory bikes go to Gresini, then you could see Bastianini swap with Marquez, and you could see Bastianini on a factory Gresini bike and Marquez on the factory bike, or you could see them stay the same, but you would have to think that unless Bastianini really outrides Marquez for the rest of the season, and he may, if they make that decision before the end of the season unfolds, then he won't have a chance to. If they're going to make that at Mugello or after Mugello, then, we're a couple of weeks away, and, Bastianini won't have a chance to show his wares. Then in that case, if Aleix retires, you could see Jorge Martin on, and he's talking to Aleix every week. They're great friends. What if that factory Aprilia job isn't open? Are they going to get rid of Aleix and bring in Jorge? I mean, I don't know. I don't know that they would do that. I don't know what Aleix's contract says. If that doesn't happen, we already know that the second KTM seat is going to Pedro Acosta. So we know it's going to be Pedro and Bratz, and that means one gas seat is going to be open. So would you rather have Jack Miller on there, or would you rather have Jorge Martin in that seat? So, I mean, I think that's an easy decision. I mean, that would be Jorge Martin if he were on the market for them and he weren't at Aprilia and he weren't at Pramac and he weren't at Factory Ducati, then you would have to imagine that Jorge Martin could be he could be in that seat. And if the Pramac seat, if it stays Ducati, I don't think Franco Morbidelli is going to be in that seat. I think he'll be elsewhere, maybe in Superbike, somewhere else. So if that stays Ducati, that seat, one of these seats, because in the Gresini seat, you're probably going to have Fermin Aldeguer and somebody, right? So it could be Fermin Aldeguer and Marc. It could be Fermin and Bastianini. So there's a lot of things in the works here. But more than likely, you would think it would fall out that Gresini staying Ducati, it's either going to be Bastianini, it's either or Marquez comes back, or it's going to be Bastianini. And you would think that, if they're going to be developing a 2027 bike, I would think that you would want to bring in Marc. Now, I mean, I had picked Jorge, but now I didn't know that all these machinations about development of the 2027 bike and maybe, so I don't know. And the signals that Jorge is giving out are not signals that say, I think that seat's mine. I mean, those are not he's even said that he's open to a satellite team now, which before he was like, I want to be a factory rider. So, and if Pramac is not in Ducati next year, there is no way Jorge is going to stay with Pramac, because he's not going to be on a Yamaha because he's going to be in the back of the grid next year. That's what you'll see. You will see Jorge back probably fairly close to Alex Rins. You will not see him at the front of the grid if he's on a Yamaha or a Honda. You just won't. You'll see then how much the rider, the bike makes a difference, because you could take a guy who is inarguably the fastest guy in MotoGP right now, you put him on a Yamaha or a Honda right now, and he's going to be in the back of the grid. That's, Rins was looked at as one of the best riders on the grid, and look where he's at. Fabio won a championship, and he was 30 seconds, 29 seconds slower. What was it, at Jerez than he was 2 years ago? So, he won a championship. So, Jorge hasn't won a championship yet, but you put him on that bike and he's not going to win a championship. So anyway, that's kind of food for thought. Thank you, Manuel. Thank you, Paddock Pass, for passing us this note show. Oxley Bomb with they came out with a great pod tonight. Let's see. And of course the race, with Simon and, Matt Beers and Val Harunchi. Great stuff. All kinds of information on those podcasts. So hopefully on this podcast, Maddie and Kayla will contact me soon to come back, because you don't want to come back here and see just this face. I mean, that's not what you want. That's not what we need. And hopefully they'll be back to offer their more learned perspectives that they have by virtue of being in the grid on one and on the other case on top of an amazing Ducati V2 Super Sport bike, as Kayla goes for the second round at Barber coming up in a couple weeks. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm also really looking forward to Catalunya. So I can't wait. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hit us up on Twitter if you can, if you will. Or let me see our Gmail address to make sure I have it. It is, you'd think I would memorize these things. You'd think it is Full Throttle Moto 31 at Gmail. Full Throttle Moto 31 at Gmail. If you have comments, and like I said, hopefully the ladies will be back so we can get a little round table, round robin conversation going. So thank you, everybody. Love MotoGP. Love you. Love the world. This is DJ saying peace out. One love. We'll see you down the road, and we're always wondering what's up around the bend. Peace.